Michelle Obama thought she had the final word. But Karoline Leavitt had other plans. Karoline Leavitt stepped forward and said what others were afraid to say. When the truth came out, even the presenters didn't know what to do next. Post in the comments, where are you watching from? The stage was set in Washington, D.C., under the dazzling lights of a nationally televised event. The audience, a mix of political elites, celebrities, and everyday Americans, buzzed with anticipation. Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, stood at the podium with her signature poise and charisma. Her presence alone commanded attention, but tonight, there was an edge to her demeanor, a sharpness that hinted at something more than the usual uplifting rhetoric. The event was billed as a celebration of progress and unity, but as Michelle began to speak, it became clear that her message carried a pointed undertone. She started with a warm smile, recounting moments of hope and resilience during her time in the White House. But as her speech progressed, her tone shifted. The warmth gave way to a biting sarcasm that electrified the room. And then, she said, her voice dripping with irony, "We had the era of Make America Great Again." The audience chuckled, sensing the direction she was heading. An era where greatness was apparently measured by the number of tweets sent at 3 a.m. and the size of, well, let's just say certain crowds. The room erupted into laughter and applause. Michelle paused, letting the reaction wash over her, before delivering the next line with surgical precision. It was a time when facts were optional and leadership was, let's call it, experimental. The crowd roared. Cameras panned to capture the reactions. Smirks, nods, and even a few standing ovations. Michelle's words were sharp, but her delivery was masterful, blending humor with a scathing critique that left no doubt about her target. She didn't mention Donald Trump by name, but the implications were clear. Her speech was a calculated strike, and it landed with precision. Watching from her modest living room in New Hampshire, Karoline Leavitt sat frozen. The young Republican rising star, known for her fiery rhetoric and unapologetic defense of conservative values, had tuned in out of curiosity. But as Michelle's words echoed through the television, Karoline felt a surge of indignation. It wasn't just the jabs at Trump that stung. It was the dismissive tone, the implication that an entire movement could be reduced to a punchline. Karoline's phone buzzed incessantly as clips of Michelle's speech began to flood social media. Friends, colleagues, and supporters sent messages urging her to respond. "Did you hear that?" One text read, "She's mocking everything we stand for." Another message was more direct, "You need to say something." But Karoline didn't respond immediately. She sat in silence, replaying the speech in her mind. Michelle's words were clever, yes, but they were also dismissive of Trump, of his supporters, and of the millions of Americans who had felt seen and heard during his presidency. Karoline knew she couldn't let this go unanswered. Yet, she also knew that her response couldn't be impulsive. It had to be measured, powerful, and impossible to ignore. As the night wore on, Karoline began to draft her thoughts. She scribbled notes on a legal pad, crossing out lines and rewriting them with more precision. Her mind raced with memories of the Trump administration's accomplishments, economic growth, criminal justice reform, and a renewed sense of patriotism among many Americans. She thought about the people she had met on the campaign trail, factory workers, small business owners, and veterans, who had felt forgotten until Trump's presidency. By the time the sun rose, Karoline had the outline of a speech that she knew could change the narrative. It wasn't just a rebuttal to Michelle Obama, it was a defense of an entire movement. And it was a declaration that the voices Michelle had dismissed would not be silenced. The morning after Michelle Obama's speech, Karoline Leavitt sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open and her phone buzzing with notifications. The clips of Michelle's biting remarks had gone viral overnight, dominating headlines and social media feeds. The former First Lady's words were being hailed as a masterstroke of political commentary, with pundits praising her wit and courage. But for Karoline, the praise felt like salt in a wound. She couldn't shake the dismissive tone, the way Michelle had reduced an entire movement to a punchline. Karoline's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, frustration, and a deep sense of responsibility. She knew she couldn't let this moment pass without a response. But she also knew that her reply had to be more than just a rebuttal. It had to be a statement, a declaration that the voices Michelle had mocked were not only valid but vital to the fabric of America. As she stared at the blank document on her laptop, Karoline felt the weight of the task ahead. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for millions of Americans who had felt dismissed and ridiculed by the political elite. She thought about the factory workers she had met in Ohio, the single mothers in Florida, the veterans in Texas, all of whom had shared their stories with her during her campaign. These were the people who had found hope in Trump's presidency, who had felt seen and heard for the first time in years. Karoline knew she had to channel their voices into her response. She began drafting her speech, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she poured her thoughts onto the screen. She started by acknowledging Michelle's charisma and influence, but quickly pivoted to the heart of her argument. "Mrs. Obama," she wrote, "your words last night were clever, but they were also dismissive. You mocked not just a man but a movement that represents millions of hardworking Americans who have felt ignored and belittled by the very system you once represented." Karoline's tone was firm but respectful. She refused to stoop to personal attacks, instead focusing on the policies and principles that had defined Trump's presidency. She highlighted the economic growth, the criminal justice reform, and the renewed sense of patriotism that had resonated with so many Americans. "Under President Trump," she wrote, "we saw unemployment rates reach historic lows, particularly for minority communities. We saw a commitment to putting America first, to prioritizing the needs of our citizens over the interests of the global elite. These are not punchlines. They are achievements that deserve recognition." As she crafted her speech, Karoline felt a surge of determination. She wasn't just defending Trump. She was defending the people who had supported him, the people who had been mocked and dismissed by Michelle's remarks. She knew her words would spark controversy, but she also knew they were necessary. This wasn't just about politics, it was about respect, dignity, and the right to be heard. By the time she finished, Karoline had written a speech that was both passionate and precise. She read it aloud, tweaking phrases and refining her arguments until every word felt deliberate. She knew this was her moment to step into the spotlight, to show the world that the voices Michelle had dismissed were not only valid but vital. Later that day, Karoline recorded her speech in a small studio, her voice steady and her gaze unwavering. She posted the video on her social media platforms, along with the caption, "Mrs. Obama, you spoke last night. Now it's my turn." Within hours, the video began to gain traction, shared by conservative influencers and picked up by major news outlets. Karoline's words resonated with millions, sparking a wave of support and igniting a fierce debate across the nation. As the views climbed into the millions, Karoline realized she had done more than just respond to Michelle Obama. She had started a conversation. And she knew this was only the beginning. The battle for respect and recognition was far from over, and Karoline was ready to fight. In the quiet of the early morning, long before the nation awoke to the fervor of political debate, Karoline Leavitt retreated to the sanctuary of her private study. The room was a modest space filled with books on history, politics, and philosophy. Personal mementos that spoke of a lifetime dedicated to public service, and a window through which soft light illuminated decades of hard-fought memories. Here, away from the clamor of the news cycle and the echoing roar of social media, Karoline began the painstaking process of preparing her public response. This was not a matter of hasty retort, but a carefully orchestrated address meant to challenge the prevailing narrative and restore dignity to a movement she believed in. Sitting at her weathered oak desk with a steaming mug of coffee at arm's reach, Karoline's mind replayed the events of the previous night. Michelle Obama's televised speech had been a masterclass in rhetorical skill, sharp, eloquent, and laced with irony, but to Karoline, it had also sounded like a dismissal of the deep-seated struggles and aspirations of ordinary Americans. The words had stung not only because they mocked a former president, but also because, in her view, they undermined a movement that had uplifted millions. As she reread the viral clip on her laptop, her fingers trembled with a mixture of indignation and determination. Every sarcastic remark, every carefully measured syllable, had ignited in her a resolve that would not be quenched by mere mockery. Her thoughts drifted back to the formative years of her own political awakening. She recalled afternoons spent with her father, an ardent community organizer, who had taught her that true leadership was about serving without expectation, about speaking truth even when it was unpopular. His gentle insistence that every voice mattered still rang clear in her ears, urging her not to remain silent when faced with injustice. Those recollections fused with memories of rallies where everyday citizens, with nothing more than their honesty and hard work, had dared to dream of a better future. In those moments, advantage was not measured by media spin or celebrity endorsement, but by genuine commitment to the welfare of one's community. Karoline knew that the achievements of the Trump era, despite their imperfections, had made tangible improvements in many lives, improvements that a dismissive laugh could not erase. Yet amid the rising fervor, doubts began to seep in. Was she capable of matching the rhetorical brilliance of someone like Michelle Obama? Would her words be perceived as a legitimate counterpoint or dismissed as mere partisan bickering? The fear of polarizing an already divided nation weighed heavily on her heart. She spent long hours debating with herself, meticulously reviewing data, policies, and anecdotes from her own experience. Each statistic about unemployment reduction in manufacturing towns, and each testimonial from a family whose life had been transformed under conservative initiatives bolstered her confidence, even as the daunting specter of public scrutiny loomed large. Late into the night, as the clock's rhythmic ticking marked the passage of time, Karoline drafted and redrafted her speech. With every keystroke, she infused her words with both hard facts and raw emotion. She forged an argument that was at once respectful and uncompromising, a call to recognize that policies, regardless of political affiliation, had real human impact. In one passage, she recalled the pride of small business owners who, buoyed by renewed optimism, dared to invest in their communities. In another, she spoke of hard-won reforms that had restored hope to disenfranchised workers and revitalized neglected neighborhoods. Her tone was measured and dignified, never resorting to personal insults even as she questioned the sincerity of a narrative that seemed designed to belittle dissenting voices. Between the lines of her manuscript, personal letters and photographs lay scattered, a homage to her own journey from a grassroots advocate to a rising Republican voice. One faded photograph captured her smiling beside a rally banner, shoulders squared against adversity, eyes alight with the promise of change. Another was a handwritten letter from a constituent grateful for her unyielding defense of their community. These reminders of personal sacrifice and public triumph steeled her resolve. They were tangible proof that the fight for truth and fairness was not a solitary endeavor but a collective undertaking that spanned generations. As dawn edged its way into the room, bathing her study in a soft, amber glow, Karoline paused to reflect on the monumental responsibility before her. The public response she was about to deliver would not merely be a rebuttal to Michelle's remarks. It would serve as a manifesto of sorts, a declaration that the values of hard work, respect, and accountability could not be dismissed by barbed humor or political jabs. She recognized that her words might further polarize opinions in a country already grappling with division. However, she believed that challenging a narrative built on superficial judgments was a necessary step toward a more honest dialogue. In that solitary moment, with the rising sun gently pushing back the shadows of the night, Karoline felt a fierce clarity. The doubts that had flitted through her mind now receded in the face of a transformative sense of purpose. Her determination was anchored in every life touched by the policies she defended, a determination to elevate voices long marginalized, to restore faith in a community that craved genuine representation. Without hesitating, she committed herself to the hard truth. Public discourse needed a rebalancing, and she was ready to be its harbinger. With the final edits added, Karoline printed her speech and held the paper in trembling hands. In that quiet, pivotal moment, surrounded by the echoes of her past and the hopes of her constituency, she knew with unshakable certainty that her battle for respect and recognition had just begun. Each word she had chosen was a call to action, a plea for the nation to look beyond familiar personas and confront the reality of its own collective potential. In that embrace of vulnerability and strength, she prepared to step into the storm of public debate, determined to make her voice a beacon for truth, dignity, and a new era in American politics. The stage was set in a packed auditorium in New York City, its walls adorned with crisp American flags and banners evoking the spirit of resilience and change. The air was electric with anticipation, as cameras flashed and reporters' murmurs crescendoed into a steady hum of expectation. In the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt, poised at a grand podium in front of an audience of thousands and millions more watching via live broadcast. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that emphasized both her determination and elegance, she radiated the quiet intensity of a leader who had decided not only to defend her beliefs, but to redefine a political narrative. Taking a measured breath, Karoline began with a calm authority that captivated every listener. "Good evening, my fellow Americans," she said, her voice steady yet fervent. "Tonight I stand before you not to engage in a partisan brawl, but to remind us all that our nation is built upon the ideals of hard work, human dignity, and a relentless pursuit of truth." Her eyes swept across the room, gathering every heart and mind in a silent pledge of unity, even as she prepared to launch into an unyielding counterargument. Karoline's speech flowed like a carefully choreographed symphony, a blend of factual precision and raw emotional candor. She recounted the achievements of the past administration, speaking of the revitalization of American industry, the historic reductions in unemployment that particularly benefited marginalized communities, and the reforms that had reinvigorated local economies. "We witnessed real change," she declared, "when policies prioritized the prosperity of the working class over the elites. Progress was tangible. In the booming factories, in the small-town businesses that reopened their doors, and in the lives of millions of Americans who finally believed in the promise of our country." Each word was measured and cut through the usual political rhetoric with an honesty that was both refreshing and incendiary. As Karoline continued, her tone sharpened, not with personal animosity, but with the pointed certainty of someone who refused to accept a one-sided narrative. While some choose to ridicule the efforts of those who dared to take bold steps in redefining leadership, we must question whether the figures we have been conditioned to revere are truly infallible. When esteemed voices dismiss an entire movement with sarcastic jabs, they do more than mock. They deny the lived experiences and aspirations of millions. Her words, laced with an unmistakable passion, challenged the status quo. She recalled specific statistics, citing improvements in community investment and social welfare programs implemented over recent years, and juxtaposed those achievements with what she described as the condescending tone of Michelle Obama's remarks. The audience was visibly moved as Karoline seamlessly merged historical context with contemporary challenges. Soft applause rippled through the crowd when she reminded them that democracy, at its best, was the product of honest debate and rigorous scrutiny, an institution that must welcome dissent as the engine of progress, rather than stifle it because it challenges the comfortable narratives of the past. "I am not here to attack an individual," she continued, "but to call for accountability and to champion a vision of leadership that respects every American voice, whether it be from the blank stares of an elite or the earnest hopes of everyday citizens." Her measured dignity juxtaposed sharply with her passionate delivery, creating an aura of undeniable credibility. In an unexpected twist that sent shockwaves through the media, halfway through her speech, Karoline revealed a trove of newly uncovered documents and first-hand testimonials that detailed overlooked successes during the previous administration. Stories of communities transformed, of regulatory reforms that had dismantled corrupt practices, and of grassroots innovations that had rejuvenated urban pockets and rural heartlands alike. Every detail served as a counterbalance to the narrative of derision she had observed earlier. Let us not forget that change, even controversial change, is not inherently a flaw. It is disruptiveness, and disruptiveness can forge new pathways toward prosperity and fairness, she pronounced. The speech was punctuated with moments of intense emotion. There were pauses where Karoline allowed the silence to speak for the millions who felt unheard. Her eyes glistened as she recounted the struggles of families that had relied on the policies she championed, and her voice steeled with resolve when she insisted that every American deserved a chance to thrive regardless of the portrayal by those in power. Amid the resounding applause and spontaneous cheers that erupted in the auditorium, her words reverberated across social media channels, sparking a viral sensation that saw her message shared, debated, and embraced by supporters nationwide. Yet, as the fervor soared, an undercurrent of tension began to ripple among critical pundits and political horsemen. Within hours, debates raged on in newsrooms and online forums. The once unquestioned narrative of the ideal former First Lady was challenged by the revelations in Karoline's address. Headlines splashed across digital screens and newspapers: Karoline Leavitt's fiery rebuttal, a new voice for the forgotten, and the counterpunch that reshaped the debate. Political analysts started dissecting her every word, and her measured yet impassioned tone became a symbol of a movement that was declaring a new era. The effect was seismic. What began as a personal rebuttal had morphed into a nationwide conversation about leadership, accountability, and the need for evaluative discourse in politics. In that charged moment, standing under the bright lights, with the eyes of millions fixed on her, Karoline Leavitt had not only countered a powerful narrative, she had ignited a spark that promised to alter the course of political debate in America. Her voice, her facts, and her unwavering dignity challenged both her opponents and her allies to reconsider what true leadership meant. The political storm ignited by Karoline Leavitt's rebuttal had reached a fever pitch. Her speech had not only galvanized her supporters, but had also forced the nation into a heated debate about leadership, respect, and the legacy of the Trump administration. News outlets dissected her every word, while social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #LeavittSpeaks and #MichelleResponds. The divide was palpable. On one side, those who championed Karoline's boldness and her defense of forgotten voices. On the other, those who rallied behind Michelle Obama, praising her wit and her critique of Trump-era politics. But just as the discourse seemed to settle into predictable patterns, a revelation emerged that would upend the narrative entirely. Late one evening, a prominent investigative journalist released a bombshell report. A cache of private letters written by Michelle Obama during her time as First Lady had been leaked. These letters, addressed to close confidants and political allies, contained candid reflections on her role in shaping public opinion and her strategic approach to navigating the political landscape. The contents of the letters were shocking. In one, Michelle admitted to deliberately crafting narratives that would resonate with specific demographics, even if it meant oversimplifying complex issues. "It's not about the truth," one excerpt read. "It's about the story we tell, the one that sticks, the one that shapes how people feel." Another letter revealed her frustration with certain policies during her husband's administration, hinting at compromises made for political expediency rather than genuine progress. "Sometimes," she wrote, "we have to play the game, even if it means bending the rules." The most damning revelation, however, came in a letter where Michelle discussed her strategy for countering criticism from conservative voices. "We don't engage," she wrote. "We dismiss. We ridicule. It's the only way to keep the narrative in our favor." The tone was calculated, almost cold, a stark contrast to the warm, empathetic image she had cultivated in public. The leak sent shockwaves through the nation. Supporters of Michelle Obama were stunned, struggling to reconcile the contents of the letters with the image of the ideal First Lady they had come to admire. Critics seized the opportunity to question her authenticity, arguing that the revelations confirmed their long-held suspicions about the manipulative nature of political elites. The media frenzy was immediate and relentless, with headlines like "Michelle's Letters," "The Truth Behind the Curtain," and "The First Lady's Hidden Agenda" dominating the news cycle. Karoline Leavitt, who had been monitoring the developments closely, knew that this was a pivotal moment. The letters didn't just validate her critique of Michelle's dismissive tone, they exposed a deeper issue: the disconnect between the polished narratives of political figures and the realities they often obscured. Karoline understood that her next move would be crucial. She had to address the revelations in a way that was both principled and strategic, ensuring that her message resonated without appearing opportunistic. In a televised interview the following evening, Karoline spoke with a measured tone that conveyed both empathy and resolve. "I want to start by saying that I respect Mrs. Obama's contributions to our nation," she began. "Her role as First Lady was historic, and her advocacy for important causes has inspired many. But these letters reveal a side of politics that we cannot ignore, a side that prioritizes narratives over truth strategy over sincerity. Karoline's words were deliberate, her delivery calm yet impactful. She didn't gloat or attack. Instead, she framed the revelations as an opportunity for reflection. This isn't about one person, she continued. It's about the culture of politics, a culture that often values perception over reality, that dismisses dissenting voices instead of engaging with them. We must do better. We must demand honesty, accountability, and respect from our leaders. The interview was a turning point. Karoline's response was praised for its maturity and thoughtfulness, contrasting sharply with the divisive rhetoric that had dominated the debate until now. Her ability to address the revelations without resorting to personal attacks elevated her status as a rising political figure, earning her respect even from some of her critics. As the nation grappled with the implications of Michelle's letters, the discourse began to shift. Conversations about leadership and authenticity took center stage, challenging the public to reconsider the narratives they had accepted without question. Karoline's voice became a rallying point for those who felt disillusioned by the political establishment, solidifying her role as a symbol of a new generation of conservative leaders. The fallout from the letters was profound. Michelle Obama, once untouchable in her public image, faced scrutiny like never before. While many continued to support her, the revelations had undeniably tarnished her reputation, forcing her to confront the complexities of her legacy. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt emerged stronger than ever, her principled response earning her a place in the national spotlight. The battle between Karoline and Michelle had transcended personal rivalry, evolving into a broader conversation about the future of American politics. And as the nation watched, it became clear that this was more than just a moment. It was the beginning of a movement. The national debate stage was set in a sprawling auditorium at a renowned convention center in Chicago, its grandeur heightened by an atmosphere teeming with anticipation. A massive screen at the back of the stage displayed the debate's title, America Speaks, The Future of Leadership, in bold, luminous letters. This event had been billed as a platform for the nation's fiercest challenges to conventional narratives, and today was its climax. At the center of this maelstrom stood Karoline Leavitt, whose impassioned response had already reshaped headlines and stirred fervent debate. Facing her, across a meticulously arranged table, was a panel of moderators and political analysts. Though Michelle Obama was not physically present on stage, her leaked letters and public statements loomed large over the discussion. When the debate moderator signaled the start, Karoline took a deep breath and launched into her address with an unwavering intensity. Tonight, she began, we are not just debating policies or political tactics. We are confronting the very way our public narrative has been sculpted. For too long, influential figures have dictated the terms of respect and legitimacy without allowing opposition to be heard. The revelations about strategic dismissals and hidden agendas, as seen in the leaked letters, force us to ask, is our democracy built on honest discourse or on the manipulation of truth? Her voice resonated powerfully, echoing through the cavernous space. As Karoline spoke, images of the controversial letters flashed on the big screen behind her. Raw scans of handwritten notes where Michelle confessed to using calculated rhetorical dismissals to maintain favorable public opinion. The audience, a mix of fervent supporters, critical independent voters, and skeptical moderates, reacted palpably. Murmurs of disbelief turned into an audible undercurrent of applause, punctuating her every point. A seasoned moderator then stepped in with a pointed question that set the stage for a direct confrontation. Ms. Leavitt, can you clarify how you differentiate between legitimate political persuasion and deliberate political manipulation? Furthermore, how do you address those who say that your response is purely partisan and lacks the civility our national discourse desperately needs? In response, Karoline's eyes shone with a tempered fire as she replied, I believe that true civility comes from honesty and accountability. When political figures, regardless of their party, shape narratives behind closed doors, hiding personal doubts, strategic ploys, and manipulations, they erode the trust we, as citizens, have in our leaders. I am not here to score partisan points. I am here to demand transparency. The facts stand for themselves, and when you dismiss those facts with sarcastic humor, You undermine the very foundation of our democratic process." Her voice, while calm, carried a piercing clarity that cut through the ambient noise. As the debate progressed, a series of questions from the audience were directed at the legacy of leadership and the responsibility to uphold truthful governance. Analysts questioned how the dynamics of political discourse might be altered when figures held to a pedestal were shown to be deeply imperfect. At one point, a well-known political commentator asked, "With these revelations shaking the established image of our former First Lady, do you believe that the American public is ready to accept a leader who acknowledges these flaws and pledges reform, rather than clinging to a sanitized myth?" Karoline seized the moment. "Absolutely," she declared. "We are at a crossroads. For decades, the narrative of perfection has insulated our leaders from criticism. But leadership is not about being without flaws. It's about facing them head-on. This debate isn't just about challenging an individual's record. It's about holding all of us accountable for insisting on transparency and truth. We deserve nothing less than a candid dialogue about our past, our mistakes, and our aspirations for the future." As her words intensified, statistics and testimonials appeared alongside her on the screen. Graphs showing shifts in public approval ratings, personal stories from citizens whose lives had improved under policies championed by the very movement Michelle once endorsed, and quotes from community leaders demanding accountability. The multimedia presentation underscored the fact that while the leaked letters had tarnished a once-idealized image, they had also catalyzed a re-examination of what genuine leadership entailed. In a particularly charged segment of the debate, a moderator pressed further, "How do you respond to critics who argue that your comments on these documents are politically motivated attacks rather than a balanced call for reform?" Karoline's response was measured but commanding. Critical inquiry should not be misconstrued as political motivation. Every leader, every policy is subject to scrutiny, especially when the truth lies obscured behind polished rhetoric. We are not here to rehash partisan battles. Our discussion is about the integrity of our political discourse. When evidence points to manipulation, when our respected figures admit to prioritizing narrative over nuance, the nation must demand better. I stand for a future where our debates are informed by unvarnished truth, not by graphic spin. The dialogue on stage continued, with Karoline deftly weaving together data, historical context, and poignant personal anecdotes. Her every word seemed to tip the balance of public opinion further. Social media exploded with live reactions, trending hashtags, viral clips of her decisive rebuttals, and fervent discussions online that questioned long-held beliefs. Critics of the traditional political elite began to shift their views as Karoline's presentation forced them to acknowledge that perhaps the revered image of Michelle Obama was more complex and, in some respects, less transparent than previously thought. The debate climaxed in an atmosphere of heightened emotion, with even the once stoic panelists visibly moved by Karoline's fervor. Her vision of a reformed political order, where accountability took precedence over image, and where every leader was measured not by public persona, but by the integrity of their actions, resonated deeply with viewers familiar with the hardships and hopes of everyday America. As the debate concluded, the auditorium erupted in a powerful ovation. Viewers at home, toggling between disbelief and admiration, began to see Karoline Leavitt not merely as a rebuttal voice but as the herald of a new political era, a tangible embodiment of the resolve to challenge entrenched narratives and demand truth from those who shape public opinion. The televised debate would, in the days to come, spark essays, editorials, and relentless discourse in every major news outlet. The confrontation had not only redefined the public image of a revered former First Lady, but it had also ushered in a ripple effect of renewed scrutiny, compelling the nation to reconsider what it meant to be a leader in America. The debate had ended, but its echoes reverberated across the nation. Karoline Leavitt's performance had been nothing short of transformative. Her ability to articulate a vision of leadership rooted in accountability and respect had not only captivated her supporters but also drawn the attention of moderates and even some skeptics. The fallout from the debate was immediate and profound, with pundits declaring it a defining moment in American politics. For Karoline, however, the real work was just beginning. In the days following the debate, Karoline's name dominated headlines. She was hailed as the new face of conservatism, a leader who could bridge the gap between traditional Republican values and the demands of a changing electorate. Her message of transparency and respect resonated with a generation that had grown weary of political gamesmanship and empty rhetoric. Social media was ablaze with discussions about her vision for the future, with hashtags like #CarolineRising and #TruthInLeadership trending nationwide. But the impact of Karoline's rise extended far beyond her own political career. The revelations about Michelle Obama's letters had sparked a broader conversation about the nature of leadership and the role of authenticity in public life. For many, the letters were a wake-up call, a reminder that even the most revered figures were not immune to scrutiny. The public began to demand more from their leaders, calling for greater transparency and a renewed commitment to the principles of democracy. Michelle Obama, once untouchable in her public image, faced a reckoning of her own. While her supporters rallied to defend her legacy, the revelations had undeniably tarnished her reputation. She issued a public statement acknowledging the contents of the letters, expressing regret for any harm caused and reaffirming her commitment to the values she had championed as First Lady. But the damage had been done. The letters had exposed a side of politics that many found deeply unsettling, forcing even her most ardent supporters to grapple with the complexities of her legacy. For Karoline, the moment was bittersweet. She had achieved a level of prominence that few could have imagined, but she knew that her success came with immense responsibility. She spent long hours meeting with advisors, crafting policy proposals, and engaging with constituents to ensure that her message remained grounded in the realities of everyday Americans. She was determined to prove that her rise was not a fluke but the beginning of a new chapter in American politics. The culmination of this journey came in the form of a televised address, broadcast live from the steps of the Capitol. Standing before a sea of supporters, Karoline spoke with the same passion and conviction that had defined her rise. "This is not about me," she declared. "This is about us, about the millions of Americans who believe in the promise of our nation and the power of truth. Together, we can build a future where leadership is defined not by charisma or clever rhetoric, but by integrity and service." Her words were met with thunderous applause, a testament to the movement she had inspired. As the camera panned across the crowd, capturing the faces of people from all walks of life, it became clear that Karoline's message had struck a chord. She had not only challenged the status quo but had also offered a vision of hope and renewal that resonated deeply with a divided nation. In the weeks and months that followed, Karoline continued to build on her momentum, emerging as a leading voice in the Republican Party and a symbol of a new era in American politics. Her rise marked a turning point, a moment when the nation began to move beyond the polarizing narratives of the past and toward a future defined by accountability, respect, and a shared commitment to the principles of democracy. As the sun set on the Capitol that evening, casting a golden glow over the city, Karoline stood tall, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. For her, this was not the end of a journey but the beginning of a movement that promised to reshape the very fabric of American politics. And as the nation watched, one thing became clear. After this moment, America would never be the same. This story was only the beginning.